It was literally Waste Man versus Bigger Waste Man. What the fuck are you talking about? Why are you nitpicking this? It's working. And we could see a version of Reform more extreme than we've seen now. Yeah, alright, we know how this looks. Whenever a guy turns on the camera, picks up the microphone and says, "Hey everyone, I'm gonna start a podcast," we already begin to have expectations of what kind of podcast it's gonna be. But believe me, it's not that kind of podcast. And because there's so many podcasts out there, and it's now a little bit frowned upon to even say you're gonna start a podcast, I was really nervous about doing this. I even had to seek the approval of people close to me, like my girlfriend, my mates, my dog. He was the only one pissed off about it. Like, when I told my dog, he literally packed up a suitcase and stayed in a hotel for the night. Like, it's not that deep. But I've not even told you what this podcast is gonna be, what it's about. Well, obviously, it's about me, duh, and I'm Ollie, and I am worried. I am worried about the political direction not only this country is going in, but the entire world. And what we're going to do on this podcast is every episode, I'm going to break down the political stories that I'm worried about and you should be worried about, but not in these morbid, depressing ways like the media might do, because, hey, let's face it, politics right now is pretty fucking morbid and depressing. What I want to do is break down politics in funny, accessible, and most importantly, unfiltered ways. Because, yeah, trust me, I cannot be impartial. If I got a job on, say, Sky News, that's meant to be impartial. If I got a job as a journalist on Sky News, I would be fired the next day. Seriously, I would be the Liz Truss of Sky News. She would watch me and go, fuck me, I've got some competition clearly. And yeah, by now you've probably guessed right. This podcast is just going to be me yapping to the microphone. And if you like the sound of my voice, that's great. But if you don't like the sound of my voice, that's also great, because if you ever get fucking criminally charged, I know the perfect sentence for you, mate. But just because this is going to be a solo podcast, if you want to call it that, that doesn't mean I don't ever want guests on the podcast. I would love to sometimes have guests on this podcast. And they don't always have to be guests who are big, popular, got loads of followers. I'd also like to bring people on that you could say are just ordinary people. Those people we don't usually hear or hear from on the mainstream media. And the reason why I like to interview the people that we don't see on the mainstream media is because they will answer your questions in a way that doesn't scream, "Ooh, that would be good to use as a soundbite on my TikTok or Instagram." No, they will answer your questions in a more unfiltered and more blunt way. And it will be able to tell you two things. The first one being what politicians need to prioritize for the public. And secondly, what are the reasons why the country might be going in a certain political direction. I mean, some of you might know this, but I recently filmed a documentary about the divide between the north and south of England. By the way, shout out to Taylor Simpson, Manny Barber, Francesco Di Ilio, and Middle Kid Productions for helping me make that come to life. It's halfway through post-production now. But when we did that documentary, we actually just interviewed those ordinary people you don't hear usually on the mainstream media. We didn't really bother interviewing big politicians, etc., because we already hear enough from them. So I'm not saying no to ever interviewing politicians on this podcast, those big politicians, if I ever got the opportunity. It would really depend how well the podcast does. But I would also really like to interview those people, again, you don't hear usually on the mainstream media. Alright, now that we got that out the way, let's get right into it. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Clacton by-election, which obviously Nigel Farage from Reform obviously won. And we're also going to be talking about the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, and the positive impact he's had so far, but the more negative impact he's had on parties like Reform, but also the Green Party. Alright, guess who's a silly twat? I am, because I actually forgot to talk about the Green Party in this episode, so pretend I never said that, alright?
Farage, Nigel, Reform UK, 22,239.
I asked the voters of Clacton to be my jury, and the verdict has now come in. You haven't heard it yet.
So, that's right. Nigel Farage won the Clacton by-election. And honestly, what a fucking surprise, seriously. Who could have expected it? Clacton is the most right-wing constituency in the entire country. I mean, they used to be UKIP, for goodness sake. Oh, actually, no, you know what? I'd take that back. Clacton is the second most right-wing constituency in the country. It's now Great Yarmouth. Great Yarmouth has Rupert Lowe as their local MP, the leader of Restore Britain. Great Yarmouth sees Clacton like they're a bunch of gender studies students, really. Now, if you don't really know the context of why the Clacton by-election happened, let me happily break it down for you. So, Nigel Farage had been under scrutiny recently due to a £5 million donation he personally received from a crypto billionaire that could have possibly broke the rules of Parliament. And because he didn't like that scrutiny, he then decided to call a by-election in his constituency in Clacton. And to call a by-election, you have to resign your seat as an MP. So Nigel Farage resigned as an MP in his constituency and then fought to replace himself as the MP of his constituency. Yeah, it doesn't sound very logical when I put it that way. I mean, really, it's not that logical, but my interpretation of what Nigel Farage's whole strategy was behind it was that he saw it as, if I win this by-election, which I obviously will, if I win this by-election, it will show that the public are behind me, no matter this scandal, and it will be a way for me to shut the media up, which it doesn't really work that way, because now that he's an MP again, he is going to be under investigation for this scandal. But a big reason why this by-election was actually so funny despite Farage winning it is that Farage was pitching this as it's him versus the establishment. And the first candidate to announce they were running against Farage was Count Binface. And if you don't know who Count Binface is, he's like this Monty Python-like candidate who's really a parody of your average politician. Oh, and also he literally wears a bin on his fucking head. And once Count Binface announced he was running, all these mainstream political parties like the Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, the Greens, and even Restore Britain announced they weren't going to bother running, and a lot of them even got behind Binface. And it was clearly an attempt from all the other mainstream political parties to make Nigel Farage's argument that this was him versus the establishment to this was him versus a man with a fucking bin on his head. It was literally Waste Man versus bigger Waste Man. And we all know it's not Count Binface who's the bigger Waste Man there. And that guy is the spokesperson for Waste. But after Farage won that by-election by an inevitable landslide, it's still so goofy because Farage is still using this argument that it was him versus the establishment and he has now taken down the establishment. Yeah, that's like me saying I am the greatest egg and spoon champion in the fucking world when my only rival was a 2-year-old who is convinced he is a hippopotamus. Like, it's really not what you think it is, Nigella. And I've already mentioned before that now Farage is an MP again, the investigation into this £5 million donation he personally received will now have to resume. And if that investigation, the verdict of it, finds him guilty, that means then there will have to be another by-election in his constituency, and he will be allowed to run in that, but that means that Clacton could have 2 by-elections in 1 year with the same candidate and essentially the same person winning it. I think Farage would still win that by-election. So really, this whole saga is just going to end up being a waste of taxpayers' money. But even with Reform winning the by-election, Reform are still in a very weird position, especially compared to the position they were in a year ago. Because not only has Andy Burnham now come in as the new Prime Minister and has proven to be a little bit more popular than his predecessor Keir Starmer, but also Rupert Lowe, the leader of Restore Britain and someone who was originally part of Reform but got kicked out partly due to him being even too right-wing for that party. He came out with this 12-minute video pitching a potential alliance to Reform. And first off, I must say, it was the most fucking dull video I have seen in a while. Seriously, it felt like a Terrence Malick movie, but 10 times slower than your average Terrence Malick movie.
Nigel, When we were both elected at the general election in July 2024, the five of us all knew that we had achieved something truly remarkable through starting the process of breaking the two-party system that has strangled and suffocated Britain for so very long. It was a special moment, and it was an honour to walk into that building as part of our group of 5 MPs. I treasured that then, and despite everything, I still treasure it today.
I don't know why it was so boring, because I don't agree with a word of what Rupert Lowe says, but at least he's a good communicator. I mean, he pictures himself as this Jeremy Clarkson-like farmer who probably spends his evenings getting off to bad halal restaurant reviews. He's there all like, oh yeah, that's it, Denise. Oh yeah, you tell him that chicken was undercooked. Oh yeah, you do that, girl. But yeah, Rupert Lowe uploaded this 12-minute video pitching to Farage a potential alliance between Restore and Reform. And obviously Rupert Lowe had his non-negotiables to forming an alliance, and so did Farage. And right now it seems that their non-negotiables, don't really align, and they couldn't find middle ground for now. So you might now be asking, all right, Ollie, well, why are you bringing this up? Why are you so worried about this? The reason why I'm worried about this is because I don't think this is the end of this possibility. And the reason why I say that is because, as I said, Reform are in a much more weird position than they were a year ago. A year ago, they were at their peak. They had been topping the polls for over a year, probably like a year and a half. They'd been topping the polls. And that is the longest a party that's not Labour or Conservative had been topping the polls ever. And because that possibility of Farage walking into 10 Downing Street and becoming the next Prime Minister at the next general election was a lot more likely back then, I think Farage is not going to ignore that. And I think that's why he's then going to get desperate, and then he's going to come back to Restore and go, all right, you know what, let me make some more compromises here. And Restore scare me. Reform scare me, but Restore is another level of fear for me. And the reason why I say that is, well, let me put it this way. Let's say there was an election tomorrow and there were only 2 parties running, Reform and Restore Britain. If you put a gun to my head at the ballot box and you said I got to vote one of these 2, I would vote Reform. That is how extreme Restore Britain are. We could one day go into their policies and compare them to Reform in another episode, but just take my word that Restore Britain are a more extreme version of Reform, and you might already think Reform's policies are quite extreme. And it also scares me because Reform have also started to become more right-wing in their policy making. For example, just today, as of filming this, it's Monday, just today as of filming this, Robert Jenrick, Reform's economic spokesperson, announced that all foreign nationals, anyone who lives here that was not born in this country, will be completely banned from claiming any benefits. Guess whose policy that was before? That was a Restore Britain policy. And Reform clearly see Restore as a threat. I mean, Restore Britain are polling at 4% in the national polls, so it doesn't seem that big of a number, but they are taking votes away from Reform, and then that ends up being an asset for Labour. So Reform seem to right now be in a position of, let's win back those voters who have gone to Restore, but I think if that doesn't work, we could then see Farage again making more compromises to form an alliance with Restore, and we could see a version of Reform more extreme than we've seen now. Now, the other thing that has caused a negative impact for Reform is, of course, Andy Burnham becoming the new Prime Minister.
I know people at home are fed up with politics. I hear you, and I want to be honest with you. We have not been good enough, and we need to be better. We will be.
That's right. Burnham became Prime Minister nearly 4 weeks ago now. And can we just pause and reflect on that? It feels like yesterday Keir Starmer was still Prime Minister. And I'm not just saying this because I'll admit I'm a bit of an Andy Burnham fan. My friends even make fun of me for it. But you know what, actually, I was an Andy Burnham fan before everyone else was, okay? And I'll get onto that in a minute. Oh, and also a little bit of a side note, I even met Andy Burnham 10 months ago when he was still Manchester Mayor. It was an awkward encounter, more on my behalf than his. I've told the story on my Instagram and TikTok, so you can find out on there. But not being biased still, he's had a really positive impact. He's done well so far in his nearly 4 weeks as Prime Minister so far. And you could pinpoint a number of reasons why Burnham has had a positive impact so far, but I think it all comes down to one big factor, which is communication. I have seen people who have never engaged or never taken an interest in politics who have now been liking or even reposting these videos Andy Burnham has done on Instagram or TikTok announcing these policies.
Do you ever look at your high street now and think, who actually asked for this? Another vape shop, another betting shop, an adult gaming centre, another dodgy business opening where something useful used to be. It's just not on, and I am doing something about it. I'm giving local people and councils more control over what opens on their high streets and more powers to rein in the unwanted businesses that just aren't good for our communities. For too long, Westminster stood by and watched as the life drained from high streets across Britain. That changes now. This government is committed to restoring our high streets and bringing back hope.
And it does take some great skill and talent to be able to do that, especially as someone who's not a populist. Andy Burnham is much more of a pragmatist than a populist. And if you don't know what a populist is, how I see populism is someone who announces policies that are popular on either the left or the right, no matter how unrealistic they are, and no matter the potential consequences that could come of it. And when you're a populist, it is so much easier to communicate with the public because you are announcing things that are popular and you don't need to think so much about a strategy behind it, a realistic strategy. And the person who I see at the moment as the biggest threat to UK politics is, we've talked about him already, Nigel Farage. And this might be a bit of a hot take. People who lean to the left might not really like to hear this. But Nigel Farage is also the best communicator right now in British politics. And yeah, it makes sense in a way because he is a right-wing populist. Reform is a right-wing populist party. But also Farage is very gifted at announcing a policy that's actually quite distasteful and in some ways racist. But he's good at creating a story and a narrative around the policy he's announcing and manipulating it in a way where it sounds like he's sticking up for the working man, the working people. And we could have not gone into the next election with our main rival against Farage being Keir Starmer. Because to put it gently, Keir Starmer wasn't the best at communicating. I mean, that is putting it in a really nice and generous way. So to put it bluntly, think of an erotic novel. Think of the most erotic novel someone could write. And then that erotic novel gets turned into an audiobook. And someone gets in their car, puts on this audiobook, and it's getting all hot and sweaty because of, the content of this audiobook. Like the windows are getting misty and the driver can't see where they're going. So think of an audiobook with that impact. Now let's think how we can suddenly, quickly remove all the aura, the charm, the personality, the tension of that audiobook. Get fucking Sir Keir Starmer to narrate it. You'd go from the most erotic audiobook of all time to what sounds like the terms and conditions manual of a vibrator. Seriously, that's what it would sound like. Keir Starmer announced some decent policies. I've got mixed feelings about Keir Starmer. But when he'd announce these policies, he would make them sound like they were the most depressing, dark, gloomy policies a Prime Minister could announce. It would be like he was reading a poorly written self-indulgent poem at somebody's fucking funeral. Seriously, I'd be there watching him announce a policy and think, shit, am I about to get fucking cremated? So thankfully, we have Andy Burnham to go up against Farage, who I think, of course, he's a great communicator, and that is someone we need up against Farage. But what I am actually worried about in this scenario isn't Burnham's communications. It's nothing really to do with Burnham. It's more the staff around him at Number 10. I read an article last week that made me very angry that Number 10, the staff in Number 10 are telling Andy Burnham he needs to cool down with his communication style because it's coming across as too blokish and he's becoming too reliant on social media to communicate his policies. What the fuck are you talking about? Why are you nitpicking this? It's working. What are you doing? Like, number 10, criticising Andy Burnham for being too good at communicating is like me calling up Beyonce and going, hey, Queen Bee, can you relax with the singing because it's making someone like me who got an F in music, an F for fuck off and never touch an instrument again, really insecure about myself. Honestly, it makes no sense. What is the logic behind it? If anyone who works in number 10 is listening or watching this, you're probably not, but let's pretend you are. Do you want to win the next election? Answer me that, because right now it feels like you don't want to win the next election and you'd be happy for Reform to walk into 10 Downing Street and damage the amazing things this country has to offer. So yeah, I am very worried about the people around Burnham if they are saying this. Andy Burnham might need to clear some people out if they're going to be giving him crap advice like that. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is, obviously, I've talked about the positive impact Burnham's had so far. Labour are topping the polls in the first time in a year and a half. He's the most approved party leader, and his popularity ratings are even going up as we speak. But that could all very quickly come downhill for him. And it could all come downhill for him in either two ways. The first one being the budget, which happens at the end of October, where we find out what taxes go up or what taxes are going down in the next year. And I think the biggest priority for any prime minister right now, and, you know, whoever was prime minister, it has to be cutting taxes for, you know, ordinary people, cutting taxes for the working class and the lower middle class, because people are struggling in this cost of living. They feel like there hasn't been much changes to their life that, you know, would positively impact their everyday lives. And I think that's what Burnham needs to prioritise in that budget. He needs to get his Chancellor, John Healey, to set out an agenda like that. And if he doesn't do that, I feel like the budget could really go down south with people in this country. I mean, the biggest thing Burnham could do is replace council tax with either a 0.6% proportional property tax or a land value tax, which would see those who live in properties worth 400 grand or less see cuts to their council tax worth up to £500 a year. So they would save £500 a year, if that makes sense. That is the biggest lever he could pull in terms of cutting people's taxes. The other thing that could all come crashing down for Burnham much sooner than the budget is the prison crisis. So, you know, of course, about the early prison release scheme that started once Keir Starmer won the last election. And why are prisoners being released early? Well, just before the 2024 general election, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was told that prisons have limited capacity and that he would have to release prisons early, which means that whoever won that general election in 2024, whether it was Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, or even Nigel Farage, prisoners would have to be released early. There seemingly was no other alternative. And I know, do not get me wrong. Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch are always very critical of when the government releases prisoners early. But what I would say to them is, what is your alternative? Honestly, what's your alternative? Are you just going to knock on the door of 84-year-old Brenda and go, oh, sorry, Brenda, but we've heard you got a spare bedroom. Is it all right if Martin from HM Belmarsh stays there? Yeah? Oh, thanks, Brenda. Honestly, he's no harm. He's only got 4 murder charges. Oh, and we've got a nonce with us as well. Can he crash on the couch? Seriously, I don't know any other alternative. And one of the first things Andy Burnham did as Prime Minister is he banned those who have committed serious sexual offences from being released under the early prison release scheme, along with prisoners who have been sentenced to life. They were never going to be released early. But Burnham has found himself in a very tricky position because 2 of the 3 lads responsible for the death of PC Harper are set to be released. And if you don't know about the case of PC Harper, he was, of course, a policeman trying to stop a burglary from being committed by 3 lads, and during that, he was killed. And from what I've read, none of these 3 lads have shown any guilt or remorse for what they did, which is why there's been a lot of anger from not only the public, but also the family and friends of PC Harper, especially his partner.
7 years after the killing of her son, PC Harper's mother says justice has not been served.
I think I'm more angry than ever.
In 2019, he was dragged behind a car while stopping a quad bike theft. Today, despite a petition signed by nearly 1 million people, Number 10 have confirmed 2 of his killers could still be released early.
I was already upset, but I feel it more now because I just feel like I'm going round in circles. And Andrew deserves more than this, you know, and we're not talking, as they keep coming back to, we're not talking about a special case for 1 or 2 people that killed Andrew. We are talking emergency service worker killers.
And Andy Burnham has said he is going to try and make an exception that those 2 of the 3 lads responsible for the death of PC Harper are not released. But it seems very hard to do that. Number 10 have apparently even told Burnham it won't be possible to do that, because if Burnham wanted to do that, he would have to bring in another ban that those who've committed manslaughter can't be released under the early prison release scheme, which you could then say, all right, just do that. But then you go back to the problem of prison capacity becoming even more limited. So I am worried about that, because I feel for both sides. I feel for the family and the friends of PC Harper. And I also do feel for anyone who would be in government right now trying to resolve that and trying to find a solution, because it's not easy. It's like you're kind of outweighing 2 big problems and you don't know which one outweighs the other. So that is something I do really worry about, because I also don't want to see those 2 lads being released. But I also do get the argument of, you know, we've got really not much choice, because the Tories really should have spent more of their time in the 14 years they had in government of building and opening more prison spaces. So it's a really tricky one. I as I said, I feel for both sides there. So it's something we'll wait to see what happens. But right now, if you were asked to ask me my prediction on it, I think we're going to see them released. If I'm really honest, I think we're going to see them released. Unless Burnham can prove me wrong on that. And I'd be very happy if he could prove me wrong on that. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Whether you listened to it, whether you watched it by video, whether you just put it in the background whilst having sex, thank you so much for just listening to what I've got to say. And in the meantime, overall, that's why I'm worried.